Hello everybody and welcome back to the Protestant Education channel. Today we're going to be talking about the different Protestant views of the Sabbath. So as some of you may know, Presbyterians are pretty strict Sabbatarians, which means that they practice the Sabbath. But what is practicing the Sabbath exactly, and what do the other Protestant traditions have to say about it? So I should really start off this video by saying that in most Protestant traditions, at least from my reading, it's not really a major concern. It's a pretty bottom tier issue. Come to church on Sunday, and that's kind of the end of the conversation. But it is important to some traditions. So let's kind of get into what practicing the Sabbath exactly is. It's a day of rest. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, it's referred to as the day of rest. And so in the Old Testament, you see this pattern. This is kind of part of them wanting more rules. In the Old Testament, the Jews really wanted God to be specific with what rest meant. Did rest mean, you can't go this far outside your house, you can't do this? These are agrarian cultures as well. So does that mean I don't feed my sheep? Because that's work. That technically counts as work. So that became a really big issue kind of post-advent of the Sabbath within religious tradition. So let's now kind of get more into the people who don't observe it and don't really see it as a biblically mandated day of rest. So the most common defense of this view that I've seen is when Jesus walked among us in the Gospels, the Sabbath isn't really a commandment he talks about. He does talk about it, and we're going to get to that in a second. But, when he talks about murder, he says, I say to you, it's been said to you before, but I say to you, whoever says he hates his brother has already committed murder. It covers adultery in that same way. It said, don't commit adultery. I say to you, a man who looks at a woman lustfully has already. But Sabbath isn't really one that he has necessarily that same kind of expanding on. With a specific example like that. And the other thing that a lot of people really add into that argument is when he does talk about the Sabbath, he's talking about how it's good to do good on the Sabbath, and he defended work in service of feeding oneself on the Sabbath. He says that he's the Lord of the Sabbath, and that the Sabbath was a gift. And so those people who don't see it as necessarily as biblically mandated as others, see it as more of a gift than a larger set of rules. So what about the people who do observe? They also see it as a gift. And they do see it as part of not necessarily the rules in a strict Levitical law sense, but they see it as part of God's larger unfolding plan for the universe. It's talked about in the Law of Moses, and it's a thing in the Law of Moses. It's one of the 10 Commandments, but it wasn't introduced in the 10 Commandments. It was introduced in creation, and that's something that is kind of pointed to here. So God created the universe in 7 days. Again, young earth creationism, there's a lot of different views with how that went down, but it's more with why is it presented to us in this manner, since God doesn't need to rest in general. So why would there be a seventh day of rest? So that gets extrapolated to that seventh day must be to some extent an example for us to follow and spend that day worshiping God. Another thing that gets pointed to is this idea of, why would 9 out of the 10 commandments apply today? Why not all 10? And I think that's also pretty fair. So where do I stand on this issue? To be honest, I'm not really quite sure. It's kind of why I wanted to do this video. I want to see what other people's thoughts are and what other people have to say. So I guess these are really the two major, I guess, well thought out, rigorous defenses that I've really seen. And I can't really decide between the two. I think there is, honestly, I can't really tell which one I'm more swayed by, even kind of sitting back here and looking at it, because to me, I think both kind of solve issues that the other doesn't, and that's what makes a lot of these theological issues really hard to talk about, not even talk about, but really figure out where your specific stance is. I want to say that I would be closer to the second view, but I do think that the first view does kind of raise some pretty fair objections. And so I don't really know. When it comes down to the Sabbath being a gift, obviously, I do think it's a gift. That's what Jesus said about it. And so I think we should take that gift and use it to worship God. Obviously, we should use that to go to church and spend time in His presence. But that kind of fits into both, or it can fit into both views. So when it comes to the second view, I think the question of why would 9 out of the 10 commandments apply today is answered with the reasoning for the first. And so you kind of have to figure out which one of those you're more swayed by as far as that part of the argument goes. But I do kind of want to hear what other people have to say and how other people see it, and what I may have gotten wrong in my summation of both of these arguments. But with all that said, you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. God bless you and all of your families, and I hope to see you in the next video.